But what if your obedience is the key to someone else's breakthrough? What if your quiet yes today shifts the course of someone's tomorrow? Esther wasn't brave for herself. She was brave for a nation. What if that very thing you feel unqualified for is the very thing God is calling you to? What if those parts of your story you try and hide, like your pain, your past, your brokenness, are actually the tools He plans to use? If you've ever thought, why would God choose someone like me? You're not alone. Esther felt the same way. She didn't grow up in a palace. She wasn't trained to be queen. She was young, she was hidden and afraid, but God called her anyway. And that's what this message is about, stepping into your purpose, even when everything in you feels unworthy and unqualified to carry it. Now, Esther's story is found in a time of crisis. She was a Jewish orphan raised by her cousin Mordecai in a foreign land. She didn't come from royalty. She didn't grow up with confidence or privilege. And yet she was chosen to be a queen. Not because she had some perfect resume, but because God had a purpose. And that purpose was to be in the right place at the right time with the courage to speak up for her people and for truth and for justice. Now, when the time came for Esther to act and to speak to the king, which she risked her life for, she didn't feel brave. She didn't feel ready. But Mordecai said something that changed everything. Yet who knows whether you have come to the kingdom for such a time as this? Esther 4:14. And that's the question I want to ask you. You see, I haven't always felt qualified, and I still don't feel qualified either. I've walked through trauma, addiction, depression, insecurities. I grew up in violence and instability, and I struggled with the drug addiction for 10 years. I carried deep pain and shame from my past. And for most of my life, I never saw myself as someone who could make a difference, let alone be able to speak or lead or do anything like this. But God doesn't call the qualified. He qualifies the called. And through His grace, I've been clean for 14 years and I've overcome things like obesity and insecurities as well, and layers of brokenness that I thought would never be healed. But God is still working in my life and it's all a work in progress. And I share that not to point to my strength, but to show you what God can do with a surrendered heart. Now, Esther didn't feel ready. She didn't have a grand plan, but she had a heart that said, if I perish, I perish. In other words, even if it costs me everything, I'll obey. And that's what true courage looks like. And that's what God is looking for. It's not having all the answers. It's saying yes to God anyway. You might be in a season right now where you feel hidden, overlooked, unseen, unqualified. But what if your obedience is the key to someone else's breakthrough, like your children and their children? What if your quiet yes today shifts the course of someone's tomorrow? Esther wasn't brave for herself. She was brave for a nation. And I believe that God is calling women in this generation to rise up that same kind of courage. Not perfect, not polished, just willing. You don't need to have it all together. You don't need a platform or a title or a perfect past. You just need a willing heart, because the same God that used Esther, the same God who brought me through years of addiction, the same God that rose from the dead and resurrected is the same God who wants to use you. You were born for such a time as this. Don't wait until you feel ready. God is already preparing the way. He's just waiting for your yes. Now, if this encouraged you, drop an amen in the comment. Amen. See you next time.